What is a diaspora experience like?
It was a shock.
Identity is at the core of us. We cannot talk about parenting without understanding the backdrop that underpin that parenting.
We're getting more educated and losing our own essence.
If we cannot be proud of who we are, that leads to some form of dislocation with our own selves.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to our podcast where we talk about everything motherhood, migration, and parenting. This is a podcast where we talk about parenting in the in-between across cultures, where the village where you come from is far away and the one where you are doesn't truly understand. Today, I have another guest lined up for you. We're going to be exploring some of the, if you like, changes in our own environment and how the diasporan feel isn't just something that you experience outside of your own shores or within your own country as well. But before I go into any of that, let me introduce our guest today, Temi Tayo. Hello, Temi Tayo.
Hello, I'm happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you so much for being here. It's my
Pleasure.
pleasure and my honor.
It's pleasure.
I know that we're going to have a really interesting episode today where we explore some of the issues that currently are emerging in our own societies here in Nigeria as well as in other African and developing country contexts. But before we go into any of that, please can you tell us a little bit about yourself? Who are you?
Okay, it's a pleasure being here once again. My name is Temitayo Ibikunle. I'm an educator. I've been in the education space for about 3 decades now. My mom is an educator and she also comes from a line of educators. Our parents were educators and all. So I'm an educator. I run a school here in Abuja, Thriving Treasure Schools, Gariki. I wear other hats too. I'm a mental health advocate, emotional intelligence coach. I love to draw, paint, write. I just have a number of artistic expressions and it's my pleasure to be here again.
Thank you very much for being here. One of the things I increasingly find as I talk to more and more African mothers, African women, is that we really are busy bees. Yeah. There's hardly anyone who's doing just the one thing. And that's in addition to being parents. So well done. The other thing I picked up on was 3 decades. I'm like, 3 decades. You don't look anywhere like you've been around long enough for that. So thank you. You look fantastic. Well done. I hope you don't mind my saying that.
No, that's fine. It's a compliment. Thank you.
Yeah. So to today's discussion then. From my discussion with you, you were born here in Nigeria and you were educated here in Nigeria. Perhaps if you give us a flavor of what that feels like, the values, the principles, the experience of being parented here at home in Nigeria. If you could just tell us a little bit about that.
Okay, so I think one of those beautiful things about Nigeria and about being growing up in Nigeria is the fact that, especially when we were growing up, values were strong. Our parents didn't play with things like respect, didn't play with things like honesty. Um, so values were strong. Now we're parenting, and as a school owner, I also get to interact with a lot of parents. And one of the things I can strongly say is that the values are eroding. And I think it's something that we need to talk about more and to really look into.
Yeah, I'm glad you say that because it was my experience as well. When you were growing up, as a parent in the UK, of course, you do what I do, what a Nigerian mother does. You'll respect.
Yeah.
You don't do that, respect. And I remember one of my colleagues saying, "Oh, no, you need to earn your child's respect." And I said, "Yes, but I am the parent. They respect me because." And I said that my accountability was to my community, my society. And one of the things I remember growing up was, if as a mother, you were disciplining your child, and a neighbor felt you were going overboard, they have the authority to come into that space and say, "What did this child do? Please, 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 it's enough." And they had full reign to do that. And that's, for me, was my understanding of, well, if I say my child should respect me, it should because I'm their parent. If I'm doing anything wrong, then somebody else should hold me accountable. However, that's not necessarily the space that we occupy today, because the structures that were around us, even here in Nigeria, aren't what they used to be. So maybe if we want to explore that a little bit more, the operator of a school, you run a school here in Gariki, Abuja, for Nigerian children. Tell me a little bit about your school, the ages of the children, and all of that.
Okay, so I run a nursery and primary school, early years and primary. So we take children from as little as 3 months for the creche up to year 6. Year 6 is between the ages of, well, parents are running these days, but it's meant to be 11. So between the ages of 3 months and 11. So
all the way from the crèche to
year 6.
year 6. Okay, so formative years.
Yes.
What perhaps a lot who say primary school, elementary school,
nursery or primary, or elementary or primary.
Okay. And I expect that if your school is in Garki, Abuja, and for those who may not know, Garki, Abuja is one of the places to be if you ever come to Abuja. So you probably have children of middle class parents.
Yes.
Up there. So tell me how that impacts on what's your experience of a teacher? Because again, in my days, if I went to school, I think my teachers, any teachers, biggest stick over you was asking your parents to come in. You did not want your parents to come into school, because if your parents came into school, not only were you disciplined by the teachers, your parents will discipline you extra at home for bringing them to school in the first instance. So just tell me your experience now in terms of how that feels like in the modern schools today.
I think things have really changed, if I would say it that way. Because yes, like you said, in our own days, you don't even want a teacher calling your parents for anything.
So you said that in your day you were brought up with a lot of values around respect, discipline, integrity. Can you tell me a little bit more what that entailed? What does respect mean in your culture that you were brought up in Nigeria?
So growing up, when your parents, you have to greet people around you. That's one major aspect of respect, and especially as a Yoruba girl, that was a major one for us, like my culture. So you have to greet people, you have to give regard to people. You see your parents coming back from work, you collect the bags from them. There's some form of reverence in the way you treat, especially people older than you. You're
Like
in the
that
bus.
word, reverence for elders.
You're in the bus, and someone older is standing, you're sitting. We were taught to give up your seats. I don't think we see anything like that any longer. Someone is an elderly person is that is coming, carrying something, you pick up, you collect from the person. Some form of reverence in how you relate.
And it's also how you call
around you.
people, isn't it? You don't call.
Yeah, so you don't call by their first names, and those are a lot of you don't call people by their first names. Even within households, when we're growing up, you won't even call your older brother. And you know that even till now, to call my older brother by name, so I'd rather use a nickname or just say Egbomi. You understand? And I find my younger ones even doing that also. So those are some form of structure that is built around us to be conscious about how we treat people that are older than us. And then you curtsy when you give when you collect something from someone older, you curtsy when you give, and things like that. So those things help you to kind of form a mindset that puts you in check. Unlike now that people just behave, you are hearing a young person talking back at an adult. Those are things that we didn't, grow up with. So
Talking back, let's explore that, because again, one of the things I learned in the diaspora is this whole idea about teenagers.
okay.
And I remember myself saying, it's not a disease. The world has how many billion people and everybody went through it.
True, yes.
So it's this idea around how people behave as teenagers. What was your experience, as a teenager? Of course, we know that there are hormones happening and all of that. But in my day, I mean, certainly my experience was that those hormones were held very much in check, and that you knew where the boundaries were. I'm sure parents also knew how to navigate and support you there, but there were clear boundaries for what you could or couldn't do. And I don't know what your experience was.
For me, growing up as a teenager, I don't know how my mom did it, because our teenage years, she had 4 children, and our teenage years, she was single. She was a single mom. She was single-handedly handling us. But I always say that, so there was some grace God gave her, because even though she was raising 4 teenagers, because our age differences were very, very slim. Between my brother and I, 1 year. Between myself and my sister, 2 years. Between my sister and my brother, 3 years. So we were really all teenagers at some point. And I am also raising teenagers now. I have a 16-year-old and a 14-year-old. And I think the difference between then and now is the fact that, like you said, the hormones are real. And I'm sure then we had the hormones, but we still wouldn't go out running mad. But the truth is that it didn't mean that we didn't have things that we struggled with. So I think the major difference now is even parents are more enlightened. So then we didn't even know about the hormones. But now we're teaching our children, or I am teaching my children about the hormones. Do you understand? So I'm helping them to understand that, okay, I get it. So instead of when they misbehave, instead of my first reaction to be blowing up, because I am knowledgeable, I can come down to, I get it. This is what is happening with you. However, it's not an excuse for you to do this. So have the understanding. And then this is how, like, my younger daughter experiences something I experience. When I'm in my period, I have horrible mood swings. But I, with self-knowledge over the years, I understood it. So once I'm in my period, and so what you would have done to me ordinarily that I would have overlooked, I find it more difficult to overlook. Okay. So when I noticed that she usually have a lot of meltdowns, I started to watch her. Okay, it's around her period. Okay, it's probably because of this thing that I go through too. So I started to sit her down, like, okay, so I understand what is going on with you. Around your period, your hormones are raging. It's giving you mood swings. Because she could sit down and just start crying. Are you asking her, what's wrong with her? I don't know.
So, I mean, it's really interesting what you say, because, I mean, I said,
So I think the difference is the knowledge. Parents now are trying to be a lot more knowledgeable about their journey and are willing to share that knowledge with their children. So that knowledge is making a difference, even though there are parents that are not doing that also. And then the culture evasion is now causing such teenagers to just be out there, because the balance that values give with knowledge makes it better. But if you take away the balance that value give and you don't put the knowledge, then it makes it worse. Does that make sense?
absolutely, I think it does. So I think what you're trying to say is that we were brought up in a culture that demands respect.
Yes.
And that culture requires us to have reverence for age. And that is a good thing. But sometimes there were excesses, in the sense that within that culture, we didn't necessarily always understand the responses of our children.
Yes.
And because we didn't always understand the responses of our children, we as parents may not have responded appropriately. So as we have better understanding of the minds of a teenager and how all of that works, we are able to support them better. However, you're saying even that has to be within the framework of, yes, I know what's happening, but we can manage this.
Yes.
It doesn't mean you start throwing stones and whatever and breaking bottles, because that's completely. So we can support them, but still have an expectation of them to behave properly within.
Yes.
our expectation.
Well articulated.
No. I think that's really interesting because one of the things I find sometimes I go to YouTube and I see these things where actually Nigerian kids, African kids in the diaspora, black kids, not just Africans, black kids, they say, this is what a black parent does, and they do a skit, where they see, black parents doing this or that sort of a thing. And I think sometimes what they're showing us is how we respond to everyday situations in a way that is different. And they see something different. And I think perhaps that's what I can explore a little bit more with you as somebody who is now an educator, who runs a school. I know that there is a lot of reverence, and I want to use that word now in a different way, context for received education. So one of the things I understand is there's a lot of, of course, a lot of our formal education came from the colonial experience from Britain anyway. But I do recall that in my time, things were changing where there was quite a lot of learning around our own country, our states, our history. And I hear now that some of that is changing, that almost if you're going to be a really great school, you've got to have a Western curriculum. Can you speak to that?
Okay. That's an interesting perspective because truly, so okay, let's take it from the business of education. So school leaders are looking for what sells. So if every time someone comes to make inquiry, they are looking for, do you have British curriculum? Do you have British curriculum? It begins to affect, decisions and how things are. And,
So the parents, the Nigerian elite are demanding
so I won't exactly say it's a one-sided thing. The world is becoming a global village. So everyone is looking for education that helps their child or their children to be relevant anywhere. Okay? So, like I say, that balance is actually something that we're struggling to find, okay? Because the world is becoming a global village and things are moving so fast. There's the Jackpot syndrome. There's the...
What is the Jackpot syndrome?
Okay, you don't know what the it is. So there's the Jackpot syndrome. There's the
mass migration,
from global north. Yes. And then there's Jackpot syndrome. There's the raising global citizen mindsets. So we're looking for, so most educators and parents are looking for a curriculum that can help you to be, that can help you to stand out anywhere. If I want to talk defending education, I'll take it from that point of view. So parents are looking for that. Educators are looking for that because we're also still conscious of the fact that we're not raising for now. We're raising for the future. We're not raising for just where you are. Life can take you anywhere. So we want to raise you to be able to stand anywhere. Okay. But where we are not balancing is there are things that we have that are cultural, that are good, that we must not let go, despite the fact that we are putting in the British curriculum and then the American curriculum, and then another person wakes up and say, oh, Finnish has the best, Finland has the best curriculum, and then we are looking for how to infuse and diffuse and confuse.
I like that, and confuse.
If I would put it that way.
But in a sense, isn't that a dilemma then of the African child in their own continent? Because one of the things I remember is, in something really simple, in geography, being taught longer days, and shorter days,
longer days, shorter nights.
Yeah,
longer nights, shorter days.
That whole thing, and I had to cram it because I live in Nigeria, equidistance.
Exactly.
It's almost the same all through the year. And then I go live in the UK. I don't have to cram it. It's normal. You just see it. March starts, the days get longer and longer all the way into summer, 11 o'clock. You don't have to cram it. And one of the things I said then was, I wish I knew more about how my own system works.
Well,
So that as you grow older, I think the question is at what stage? Because I do agree with you. We've got to raise global citizens because we live in a globalized world. But going back to my point about this podcast, about rootedness, because I think for you to reach out, you have to be centered.
so yes.
And in some ways, I wonder, and it's a question, I wonder whether that centeredness that we had growing up in our culture, in our history, especially in the early years, nursery school, primary school, into secondary school, as an educator, what are your thoughts around that? How do you think that impacts on people's sense, young person's sense of their identity, of their culture, of their personhood?
So I understand that place of identity and the fact that it's important that everyone is rooted in the idea of who they really are. And now coming to join that with we need to raise global citizens. I think one of the major things we can do as schools and educators is also to invite a lot of who we are into the curriculum. I think that's important because, for example, when I teach weather in school, even though you would learn the 4 seasons, you would learn rainy season and dry season because rainy season and dry season is your reality. Okay? But we won't stop at rainy season and dry season.
But why? Because my son who grew up in the UK never learnt about rainy season and dry season.
Let's be objective about this. If your son who grew up in the UK never learns the rainy season and dry season, when he comes back to Nigeria, he will still have to experience rainy season. And
No, what I'm saying is, of course, I taught him as a parent that these are the seasons we have. I'm talking about schools and the role in the formation of our young,
but like you said earlier,
the curriculum and how it forms our young people. So why is it so important that a Nigerian child understands the 4 seasons, but that an American British child does not need to understand the 3 seasons?
So first of all, let's go back to the foundation. The education is a Western idea. So if we're taking it from them, what we need to do is to be conscious of making it ours, which is a work that we need to consciously do. For the Nigerian system, for example, I can speak for primary and secondary. I know that the government is really trying to standardize what the curriculum and what the curriculum content should be, but there's still a lot of confusion around that. One morning, the way government you hear policies like, oh, you must teach Nigerian languages in school, which I think is a really beautiful one.
That's a critical part of identity.
Yeah, which I think is a really beautiful one. And there was even a proposition one time that education in Nigeria should be done in mother tongue. But there are a lot of barriers and dynamics to these things. And because as a nation, we are also a very dynamic, different set of people. So in your class, you will say, okay, let's teach in the Nigerian language. And then you have an Hausa boy, you have somebody from Efik. Do you understand? So there are a lot of dynamics that actually works into it. But I really do agree with you that
because that's one of the things the Kenyans have done. In fact, East Africa has done really well. Because Swahili, they have their languages. I mean, and I know, for instance, that in Kenya they have the and I do have a guest who'll be talking about some of that in Kenya. But they kind of have Swahili because part of language, there are things that I can say in my language.
Yeah.
That I don't have the English words to say.
I actually think language is a very big part of identity. And Nigeria in particular, I don't think we're doing too well with it because even in our households, a lot of our children are not speaking their mother tongues
anymore,
any longer. And it's eroding very fast. Teaching it in school, there's so much they can pick as against, letting it be grounded at home. But like we were saying, there's a lot of intentionality that needs to go into our curriculum around this part of the world. We're not there yet. But I know that, the government is trying to do the things the government is trying to do. But one of the things that I think we also have as a problem is I'm a private school owner. The fact that even the ideology, in the private sector, you see a school saying, what I run is British curriculum. What I run is American curriculum. I run Finland. So that disparity doesn't help us to have a one voice as against a place where the nation says this is what you must run by and everybody runs by it.
So some of these then is about perceptions, about how well people feel they will settle into a different system, and ensuring that those children are prepared in that culture in which they want to go.
To settle in his.
And therefore, in some senses, that will lead to dislocation, because a child based in Nigeria is thinking about how they will settle in a different culture. So they're almost living in the diaspora before they're in the diaspora.
Yes, for most elites in Nigeria now, the reality is that a lot of us are living in the diaspora. It comes down to everything. The clothes you wear, you order from abroad. Do you understand what I'm trying to say? It's almost like the Western culture is really, especially with the elites, with the people that are not so educated and not so financially empowered, you still find a lot of, but there's a sense of, oh, it's better out there actually, that we're even subconsciously giving the children, which is also driving a lot of these things that are happening. And this is hard, but it's true, which is driving a lot of things. But I would say it's very important for us to be.
And in the age of social media, that becomes even bigger in the age where we've kind of got international media in our beaming DSTVs and the rest in our living rooms. Because I remember when I was growing up, even the dramas I watched were Nigerian, and so it was easier to discern.
And you even hear things like Nigerians saying things like they don't watch home video, as in it beats me. And then they say, and they criticize it for different things. But the truth is that these are your realities, right? They can be better than what they are now, but they won't be better if we are avoiding it. They will be better if we sit into it and see how we can make it better. So I understand that disparity. And I think that is very important that for groundedness, a lot of who we are needs to be embedded into our curriculum.
Our curriculum. All right. I think we've covered a lot of ground. My final question, because again, this is really about ensuring that we have well-rounded kids. And I don't mean well-rounded kids who are prepared for a different education in a different country, but for kids who have a sense of self. As somebody who lives in the diaspora, somebody who works in an environment where lots of children do come in, how do you think we can best continue to prepare our children as global citizens to first and foremost be themselves? Because if you're not first yourself, I think one of the things that has come up in the course of my research in this area is that most kids who've grown up in the diaspora have always felt less than, because all of the messages that comes to them is saying something else is better. And hearing that even within Nigeria, they feel that, oh, the British curriculum, not the education, curriculum is better. The American curriculum is better. The Finnish curriculum is better. How are you seeing that translated in the day-to-day in your classrooms amongst your pupils?
So I think, let me take you a bit out of the school. I think much of the work for grounding and individuality and identity needs to come from a family.
Yes, but we need a village. So I will be talking about the families and what people do, but we need a village. And I think part of this is about the reinforcing. So how do the schools reinforce?
I want to take it from there, then I'll bring it to the school.
Okay.
Majority of it needs to come from the family. Why? It's an individual thing. Round. Okay? So I believe a majority of grounding needs to come from family. And then as a school, we can help to consolidate. So I think one of the major things we should do at schools is to bring the values back to school. And that is very important. And I think a good number of Nigerian schools are doing that. Bring the values back to school. Um, Bring the culture back to school. And I think, yeah. So, for
I know that we
example,
have
in
culture
primary school,
days.
thank you. In primary schools, we do cultural days. Those are these little ways of bringing these things back to school. So, bring the culture back to school, bring the values back to school, put your foot down when it comes to ensuring the values in school. I know we have a bit of struggle with that with parents because of how these things are eroding, but there's still a good number of schools that are still strong when it comes to instilling values and the fact that children must be responsible, children must be respectful, children must be disciplined, and all that.
Wow, another really, really interesting discussion. I think this time we kind of brought the diaspora to Nigeria and to see how, even though kids are here, that our experience as parents is actually very different from what our children are experiencing. Our children invariably have access to social media, they have access to cable TV networks, where a lot of their experience is not just defined by their immediate
Yeah.
environment, but by the global village that they live in. And then in addition, because of the pressure on parents who perhaps perceive Western ideals to be better for their children, and I put that in big quotes, then go after those. So the balance that we need to ensure that our children are rounded isn't just a question for the diaspora, but it's also for African countries that are emerging into a globalized world in which they need to perhaps be more muscular
Yeah.
in pushing forward their own culture, their own identity,
exactly.
and ensuring that our children are
Rooted and even though they have to live outside of their countries, they don't lose that identity and that thing that makes them them.
Thank you so very much, Temitayo. It's been a pleasure speaking to you. And thank you very much for listening. I hope you've taken a lot away. I'm sure a lot of controversial points.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Look forward to seeing you in the next episode. Bye-bye.